The story of a teenager's life in ancient Rome begins not with excitement or chaos, but with the slow and gentle unfolding of a society that moved according to rhythms older than its stones. The Roman world was built on repetition, on duties, on expectations passed down through generations, and a teenager growing within that world learned early that daily life was not shaped by spontaneous adventure, but by tradition, by family, and by the silent weight of Roman order. A Roman teenager woke not to alarm or urgency, but to the measured light entering through the atrium, a pale softness touching the stone floors and the painted walls, reminding the household that another day had begun much as the last one had ended. In this world, childhood faded quickly, and adolescence did not mark a rebellious break, but a slow acceptance of duty. A Roman teenager stepped into life with the understanding that identity was not something constructed individually, but inherited from ancestors whose names were preserved in wax masks and marble inscriptions. Every young person felt the presence of those ancestors, even during ordinary moments. Their images watched quietly from the household shrine, the faces worn smooth by time, yet still carrying the dignity of lineage. The Roman teenager lived beneath their gaze, learning that honor was not a dramatic achievement, but a steady practice woven into daily routines. Morning began with small tasks. Water had to be drawn or carried, oil lamps cleaned, sandals strapped, garments arranged. The teenager wrapped themselves in the tunic that marked their status, simple or finely woven depending on their family's rank. Clothing was more than fabric. It was a sign of belonging to a structured society. A wealthy teenager might wear soft linen imported from distant lands, while a poorer one wore rougher cloth, but both participated in the same quiet ritual of preparing for the day. Breakfast was modest, another sign of the Roman preference for moderation. A piece of bread, perhaps dipped in wine or oil, maybe fruit if the household had stocked some, or leftovers from the previous evening. The meal was not hurried, but neither was it leisurely. It existed simply to begin the day, not to define it. Teenagers in Rome learned early that pleasure was not an essential part of daily life. Function mattered more than indulgence, and the Roman ideal valued self-control not as a punishment, but as a natural condition of civilization. After breakfast, the day divided according to status. A teenage boy from a respected family went to his studies, guided by a tutor who taught the foundational skills of Roman citizenship. Reading, writing, rhetoric, and sometimes Greek language formed the core of education, because the Roman elite admired Greek learning even while ruling Greek lands. The teenager learned letters by tracing them on wax tablets, feeling the grooves form beneath the stylus. Writing was not fast. It was a slow, repetitive act, each letter drawn with patience, each line an exercise in discipline. Through this slowness, a Roman teenager understood that learning was not about inspiration, but endurance. Lessons in rhetoric were even slower. Words had weight, and the tutor insisted that each sentence be shaped carefully, balanced, and delivered with controlled breath. A Roman teenager in Rome learned to speak not for entertainment, but for clarity, dignity, and persuasion. Arguments were constructed brick by brick like the buildings of their city, with the same emphasis on stability. Every day the teenager practiced speaking aloud, not loudly, but steadily, imagining themselves one day in the forum, where citizens debated the laws that shaped the empire. Meanwhile, a teenage girl from a respectable family learned the rhythms of household management. She observed her mother or female relatives oversee servants, manage supplies, prepare meals, and maintain order. Girls were taught to spin thread, to weave, to sew, because these tasks represented not merely domestic skill, but the quiet strength expected of Roman women. A girl's education centered on the home, not because she lacked ability, but because Roman society placed her within the walls that held the family together. She learned that the household was its own small empire, and her future contribution to it was expected long before she reached adulthood. Outside the home, the teenage experience differed sharply. Working-class teenagers learned their trades early. A boy apprenticed to a carpenter, potter, baker, or blacksmith began his day with repetitive labor. He shaped wood, clay, or dough under the guidance of a master. The work was slow and methodical. He learned to respect the tools, to appreciate the rhythm of craft, and to understand that skill came not suddenly, but through countless hours of repetition. A girl in a poor household helped in the marketplace, carrying baskets, preparing goods, or assisting in small trades that sustained the family. Childhood blended into responsibility without ceremony. Regardless of class, Roman teenagers moved through a world filled with sound and structure. Hooves clattered on stone streets, vendors called out prices, fountains trickled constantly, and the distant hum of activity filled the air. But beneath the noise there was order, a distinctive Roman sense that each person, each activity, each moment had a place within the larger mechanism of society. Teenagers absorbed this order naturally, not through formal instruction, but through living within its carefully arranged spaces. Religion also shaped daily life. The household gods, the lares and penates, received small offerings. A Roman teenager participated in these rituals without question, lighting a small flame, placing a bit of food beside the shrine, or murmuring a quiet prayer felt ordinary. Religion was not a dramatic force, but a constant presence. It guided behavior gently rather than strictly. A teenager in Rome learned that piety meant consistency, not intense devotion. The divine world existed alongside the human one, woven seamlessly into daily life. As the day progressed, the teenager witnessed the endless motion of the Roman city. Workers repaired roads, shopkeepers displayed their goods, officials posted new notices, and travelers from distant provinces mingled with locals. The diversity of languages and faces reminded Roman youths that they belonged not just to a city, but to an empire that stretched across seas and mountains. Yet despite its vastness, the empire felt stable, almost unchanging, because each day resembled the last. By midday, activities paused for food. A simple meal of bread, cheese, olives, or vegetables sustained the household before the heat of the afternoon settled over the city. Teenagers rested briefly, continuing the pattern of moderation. Afterward, lessons resumed, or labor continued, or household duties unfolded. Nothing rushed. Time in ancient Rome moved with deliberate patience, teaching teenagers that life was not a race, but a series of responsibilities that shaped the future without demanding haste. Evening approached slowly, and the city softened. Lamps were lit, fires burned low, and families gathered for the main meal. Teenagers listened to stories of ancestors, to lessons about virtue, discipline, and honor. They learned humility in the presence of elders, and pride in the legacy they inherited. Meals were not loud or chaotic. They were quiet exchanges of food and wisdom, the Roman way of passing knowledge from one generation to the next. When night settled, a Roman teenager rested in a space shared with siblings or relatives. Privacy was rare, but companionship was normal. The sounds of the city dimmed, replaced by distant chatter, occasional footsteps, and the faint echoes of life continuing in the streets. Sleep came slowly in a world without clocks, alarms, or artificial light. The teenager drifted into rest, knowing that tomorrow would begin exactly as today had begun. And so the life of a Roman teenager unfolded with calm inevitability, each day shaped by expectations, duties, and traditions older than memory. The story of their adolescence was not one of sudden transformation, but of gradual learning, constant observation, and quiet acceptance of the path laid before them. Their world moved slowly, and so did their lives, shaped not by dramatic events, but by the steady influence of Rome itself. Life for a teenager in ancient Rome never began suddenly at 13 or 14. It began long before that, shaped slowly by the traditions of the household, the expectations of the father, the quiet rituals of everyday life, and the long, gradual movement from childhood to responsibility. In Rome, childhood itself was not a separate world as people imagine today. It was a doorway, always open, always preparing the child to enter the adult sphere of duty, honor, and labor. Even in wealthy homes, the steps were predictable and steady. A child grew not through freedom, but through structure. A house was a school long before the boy or girl ever entered a real one. For boys, the path to adulthood began with the bulla, the small amulet worn around the neck shortly after birth. It was meant to protect the child from evil spirits and misfortune. As long as the boy wore it, he remained a child. The day he removed it was not only symbolic, it marked the crossing from innocence into responsibility. For girls, childhood was shorter and more quiet. A girl helped her mother, learned domestic tasks, prepared dowries, and practiced the behaviors expected of a Roman matron. Silence, diligence, modesty, and obedience were her 4 pillars. These rules shaped her even before she understood them. Education formed the next layer, slowly and without pause. A teenage boy had already spent years learning reading, writing, arithmetic, and basic literature. At 7, he was guided by a literator, a simple teacher who focused on reading tablets and copying letters on wax. At 10, he moved to the Grammaticus, where life became stricter. Greek poets, Roman legends, Aesop's fables, Homer's epics, myths, and histories filled his days. He memorized lines endlessly, recited them in front of classmates, and received corrections until the phrasing was perfect. Language shaped the Roman mind, and a teenager felt himself grow older with every text he mastered. Each page felt like a step closer to manhood. Girls learned differently. Their education occurred inside the home, under the eye of their mother, grandmother, or an experienced slave woman who managed domestic order. They learned how to spin wool, weave cloth, store food, maintain household accounts, supervise servants, and negotiate small market dealings. A Roman girl's training was not loud, but steady, built with repetition. She watched her mother greet visitors, resolve arguments, and manage daily rituals. By the time she reached her teenage years, she already understood the rhythm of running a home. Roman religion also guided teenagers through life, forming an invisible but powerful structure. Rituals filled every month: offerings, festivals, purification ceremonies, sacrifices, and household rites. Teenagers learned these from observation, then participation, lighting the household fire, honoring the Lares and Penates, guardian spirits, marking seasonal festivals such as Saturnalia or Lupercalia. These acts taught responsibility more efficiently than lectures. Boys learned the sacred duties they would someday perform as heads of households. Girls learned the rituals they would continue as future mothers. Religion trained them in discipline, patience, and tradition. Work became another central part of teenage life. A boy in a wealthy household shadowed his father during business dealings, public speeches, political gatherings, and legal visits. The Roman teenage boy saw adulthood before entering it, which made responsibility feel familiar, not sudden. A teenager from a poor family worked much earlier. He helped in shops, carried goods through markets, tended animals, assisted craftsmen, or joined family labor. Life was not built around the idea of youth as freedom. It was built around the idea of preparation. Girls also worked. They prepared wool thread, wove cloth for clothing and bedding, helped cook, cleaned storage rooms, fetched water, and took part in managing household slaves if the family owned any. If the family was wealthy, she also helped organize small social activities, supervised younger siblings, and assisted in preparing meals for guests. Her labor was not public, but it was essential. The teenage years also introduced Romans to community life. Boys joined in public festivals, games, athletic activities, and social gatherings. They watched gladiator fights, chariot races at the Circus Maximus, and dramatic plays. These events taught them social hierarchy, who sat where, who spoke first, who held power. They absorbed ideas of honor, victory, and reputation. Boys practiced running, wrestling, ball games, and throwing exercises in open fields or gymnasiums. Physical training was not only for fitness, it symbolized discipline and readiness for future citizenship. Girls did not attend such events as freely. They could go to plays, races, or festivals with their families, but participation was limited. Their world remained anchored to the household. Their reputation was a form of wealth. Quietness, modesty, and restraint were more valued than public experience. A girl's behavior reflected her family, and her teenage years were spent perfecting the qualities expected of her future role. Friendships existed, but they were less casual than modern ones. Boys formed deep bonds with classmates, neighbors, and sometimes older mentors. These friendships often lasted into adulthood, shaping alliances in politics or business. Girls formed close relationships with their sisters, cousins, and sometimes nursemaids or household servants. These connections created emotional strength within the domestic world. The transition into adulthood came earlier than modern expectations. A boy became a man around 16 or 17, marked by the toga virilis ceremony. On that day, he removed his childhood bulla, put on the plain white adult toga, and walked through the city, accompanied by family, slaves, and sometimes musicians. He prayed to the household gods, visited the forum, and received recognition as a full Roman citizen. This ceremony transformed him socially, legally, and symbolically. A girl's transition was quieter. She entered adulthood through marriage, sometimes as early as 14, sometimes slightly later depending on family decisions. Her wedding rituals involved combing her hair in a symbolic style, wearing a saffron-colored veil, and joining her husband's household. Her adulthood began through service to a new family, not through public status. Teenage life in ancient Rome, whether for boys or for girls, did not center on exploration or emotional self-discovery. It centered on preparation, learning, ritual, and responsibility. Every part of teenage life, education, chores, religion, public events, and family roles led toward a clear destination, adulthood governed by duty. While modern teenagers often look for identity, Roman teenagers looked for their place in a strict social structure that expected them to fulfill inherited roles without complaint. That is why Roman teenage life feels slow, structured, and predictable. It existed inside a world where continuity mattered more than individuality, where the household mattered more than personal desire, and where every step from childhood to adulthood followed patterns set centuries earlier. Their days moved with steady purpose, their routines shaped by expectations, and their futures carved by tradition. Mourning in ancient Rome did not rush. It unfolded layer by layer, like a city stretching its limbs after the weight of the night. As a teenager, you rose not because an alarm shouted at you, but because the household began to shift. Servants stirred fires, footsteps echoed in the courtyard, and faint light passed through woven shutters. You felt the day begin before you opened your eyes. The house around you breathed in a rhythm older than your generation. The atrium, with its impluvium catching the first pale light, glimmered with cool reflections. Water lay still in the shallow basin, a small mirror for the household gods. Your father stepped slowly through the corridor, offering a glance toward the lerarium as he crossed the main hall. Every movement in the home carried quiet purpose. Teenagers in Rome did not have the freedom of late waking. Responsibilities expected your presence. Your mother supervised the preparation of breakfast, simple bread, olives, or leftover cheese. There was rarely indulgence because Romans valued discipline. Even the wealthy emphasized modesty in the morning. You ate sitting upright, listening as your father described the plans of the day or reminded you of expected behavior. You responded with short phrases, respectful, careful not to speak over him. When breakfast ended, the path of your day divided depending on your family's social standing. Boys prepared for school or training, while girls remained within the household, guided by routines that shaped their expected roles. If you were a Roman teen boy, a tutor or pedagogue escorted you through the streets. He monitored your posture, corrected your speech, and reminded you of virtues like dignity and restraint. School was not loud or chaotic. It took place in open-air spaces or small rented rooms. Lessons centered around reading, writing, and especially rhetoric. Your teacher dictated passages from old poets. You copied them slowly on wax tablets. Everything happened at a careful pace. Writing required warming the stylus, smoothing the wax, carving each letter, and checking each stroke. Mistakes were scraped away gently. The process demanded patience more than creativity. Your mind learned rhythm rather than speed. During breaks, you stepped outside and watched the city hum slowly. Vendors set up stalls. Potters shaped clay. Bakers pulled bread from clay ovens. The smell of smoke mingled with rising heat. You spoke quietly with friends about small things, a new piece of armor in a shop window, a rumor about a local senator, someone's older brother returning from the frontier. Even gossip had a formal tone because Roman society valued restraint. If you were a Roman teen girl, your morning began with supervision in the household. You learned weaving, organization, and hospitality. Household management was considered a crucial skill for future marriage. You worked with spindles, helping shape wool into thread. The rhythm of pulling, twisting, and guiding the fibers created a steady, meditative sound. Older women corrected your hand movements with soft but serious gestures. You assisted in preparing midday meals, lighting lamps, or tending the family shrine. Guests came to meet your father, and you moved quietly in the background, observing how adults handled discussions. You learned hospitality, not as a performance, but as a duty. Wealthy girls sometimes studied literature or music if their families valued education. But these lessons also unfolded slowly and carefully. You practiced the lyre, repeating small passages for hours. There was no rush. You learned through endless repetition. Midday heat and the teenager's world. Rome at midday grew louder, but your life still followed structured expectations. When school ended for boys, you returned home in the company of your pedagogue. He watched everything: how you walked, where you placed your eyes, whether you stopped too long at a vendor's stall. Teenagers were expected to show virtue even outside the home. Lunch was simple and usually left you slightly hungry because Romans believed appetite sharpened discipline. After eating, your household often entered a quiet hour. Some rested, some worked. You either studied, practiced writing, or assisted your father in small tasks. Letters needed copying. Household accounts needed reviewing. Messages might need delivering. Girls continued weaving or learned how to manage servants. Older women taught you how to store grain, how to arrange clothing, and how to prepare ointments from herbs. Every skill reinforced calmness, patience, and control. Afternoons in the Roman world. The afternoon offered slightly more freedom, but even this freedom carried boundaries. Teen boys visited the baths with their fathers or older brothers. The bath complex was a world of its own. You entered warm rooms, then hotter ones, adjusting slowly to the temperature. You scraped oils from your skin with a strigil. You practiced swimming in the cool pools. You listened to older men talk about politics, economics, and military campaigns. Girls stayed home, practicing music or embroidery. Sometimes they visited relatives, accompanied by adults. They observed gardens, learned about medicinal plants, or prepared items for religious festivals. Life unfolded gently, with slow, deliberate steps, never rushed, always guided. Evening meals, conversations, and youthful expectations. Evenings in a Roman household were structured. Dinner was the largest meal, prepared with attention and served in courses. Your father reclined on a couch, as custom required. You sat upright, since reclining was a privilege of adulthood. Conversations touched on history, family matters, or the news from far provinces. You listened more than you spoke. Teenagers in Rome lived with a constant awareness that adulthood approached. Boys prepared for civic responsibilities, military training, and future political ambition. Girls prepared for marriage, dowries, and domestic authority. Everyone watched their behavior. Every gesture mattered. Night and the quiet Roman household. When the lamps dimmed, household activity slowed. Servants closed doors, checked locks, and placed offerings near the family shrine. Rome made noise outside, vendors calling late, carts rolling on stone, but inside, your world softened into silence. You returned to your bed, hearing footsteps echo faintly across the courtyard. A Roman teenager did not end the day with excitement. You ended it with duty. You thought about tomorrow, lessons, expectations, the slow, careful rhythm of another day in a society built on discipline, tradition, and unspoken rules. At this point in your Roman teenage life, you have begun to understand that Rome does not simply shape you through your family or your education, but through the invisible threads that tie every small moment of your day to the large, slow machinery of the empire. As you wake again in the dim light of dawn, the same pale mixture of torch smoke and early morning fog drifting across the tiled roofs, you feel the day settle upon your shoulders in a way that is both familiar and quietly heavy. Rome is loud even before the sun rises, with bakers stoking ovens, street vendors preparing their carts, slaves filling water jars, and patrols shifting positions across the Subura, where your family lives. As a Roman teenager, you do not question this noise anymore. It has become the pulse of your world, a constant beat beneath everything you do. Your morning begins in the same slow rhythm as every day. Someone in the household is already awake long before you, either the household slaves or your mother checking the storage room where amphorae of olive oil, vinegar, and garum are kept. You rise to wash your face with cold water poured carefully from a jug, and while the splash sharpens your senses, you still feel half asleep. Water is always used sparingly. Even in a powerful empire, clean water is never wasted casually. Though Rome has aqueducts delivering enormous quantities of water to baths, fountains, and wealthy villas, an ordinary family measures its use carefully. The rivulets of water running across your hands feel strangely symbolic. This is the closest thing the average Roman has to a private morning ritual. Breakfast is small, predictable, and unchanging. Bread, olives, maybe some cheese. The bread is hard enough that you usually soften it with wine mixed with water, which nearly everyone drinks because the water alone can sometimes taste strange due to mineral deposits in clay pipes. As you chew the simple breakfast, the voices of neighbors drift faintly into your home. Someone is arguing about the price of grain. Someone else is preparing to open a shop selling small bronze tools. Everyday Roman life always begins with work, and as a teenager, you're expected to learn the rhythm of that work with each passing year. Your father or mother remind you, as they often do, about your responsibilities. If your family is artisan class, you may need to go to the workshop. If they are merchants, you will accompany someone to the forum. If they are farmers, though you likely live outside the city, you would go early to check the fields. If you belong to the wealthier class, you will prepare for studies with a tutor. And if you are unlucky enough to have no trade or reputation yet, your day might begin with errands, carrying messages, or waiting for opportunities. Regardless of class, Rome expects teenagers to inch toward adulthood through labor and discipline, not through leisure. The concept of teenage years as a special phase does not exist. You are either a child or an adult. These in-between years simply exist to prove that you can eventually hold responsibilities. As you leave the house, you step into the narrow streets of Rome where the day has already begun to quicken. The smell is a strange mixture: freshly baked bread, manure from donkeys, perfume from wealthy women's passing litters, and smoke from countless small fires. Rome is never clean, but it is always alive. The paving stones under your feet are uneven, worn by decades of carts passing carelessly. You have learned how to walk on these stones without stumbling, another type of Roman education. At this point, if you are heading to school, you do so with a wax tablet, a stylus, and a feeling that lessons will drag on. School for Roman teenagers is repetitive: copying letters, memorizing speeches, practicing arithmetic, listening to stories of old generals who conquered Gaul or Carthage. Though these lessons sometimes feel tedious, they are essential for your future in public life. Rome values rhetoric almost above knowledge. Speaking well can raise a family's status. If you stumble in your recitation, your teacher may tap you lightly with a stick, not out of anger, but as part of a discipline everyone accepts. Your classroom is not a special building, but a rented room or a shaded spot near a portico. Students come from different families, dressed in simple tunics, some whispering jokes while others try to focus. Your teacher's voice merges with the noise of the streets, metal striking metal, merchants shouting prices, the distant rumble of carts. Study is never completely quiet, but the Romans do not expect silence. They expect concentration amid chaos. If your family is wealthier, your tutor might take you through texts of Greek philosophy. You memorize lines from Homer or Virgil. You learn how Romans see themselves as inheritors of Greek wisdom, convinced that the empire must maintain its intellectual traditions as tightly as its military power. And though you do not yet fully understand the philosophies you memorize, you sense that knowing these texts grants prestige. When lessons end, the day is still long. Your stomach begins to grumble. Lunchtime approaches, though Romans eat lightly at midday. Street vendors sell small snacks, nuts, figs, flatbread, little pastries filled with cheese. You may buy one if you have coins. If not, you head home to eat leftovers from the morning meal. Teenagers often feel hunger constantly, but in Rome you learn how to manage that hunger with simple food. After lunch, your responsibilities depend on your family's role in society. If you work in a shop, you return to help. If you are training for a trade, you assist your master, learning skills slowly, methodically, shaping wood, preparing cloth, grinding herbs, or forging iron. Each movement becomes a small lesson. Rome is full of sound, hammering, scraping, sawing, and these noises form the background of your teenage years. If your family is wealthier, the afternoon might include physical training. Romans believed the body must be strong enough for military service. You practice running, wrestling, discus throwing, or spear training. Not everyone will join the army, but the idea that a Roman citizen should be physically capable is deeply ingrained. You tire easily, but you push yourself because this is part of becoming an adult. The social world of a Roman teenager becomes more noticeable in the afternoon. You meet friends in the streets or near public fountains. Conversations revolve around gossip, politics overheard from adults, the latest gladiator matches, or rumors of festivals. You talk about food, clothes, or who is about to marry whom. But you do so quietly. Rome is full of ears, and every teenager learns to speak carefully, understanding that rumors spread fast. The late afternoon brings shadows across the city as you walk toward home. Families prepare the main meal of the day, and you help if needed. Chopping vegetables, grinding spices, or fetching water becomes part of your routine. The smell of cooking fills the insulae: lentils, onions, bread, wine, sometimes meat if your family can afford it. Dinner is not grand unless you belong to the elite, but it is warm, predictable, and comforting. After dinner, the streets cool. You may be allowed outside briefly, though your family warns you not to wander far. Rome at night is unpredictable. Pickpockets roam, fires break out easily, and patrols keep watch. You hear singing from taverns, laughter from gamblers, whispers from alleyways. You learn slowly how to navigate Rome by instinct. The evening stretches into a long period of quiet before sleep. Your family talks softly. Someone repairs clothing. Someone checks the oil lamp. You lie down on a simple bed or mat, feeling the same tiredness every Roman teenager feels. Tomorrow will be similar: disciplined, loud, crowded, ordinary. But the slow unfolding of these days forms the rhythm of your life in ancient Rome. And as sleep arrives, the distant sounds fade: the last cries of vendors, the clatter of a late horse cart, the soft footsteps of someone sweeping the street. You drift into sleep with the calm acceptance that your teenage years are not defined by excitement, but by the slow molding of your identity within an empire that expects every citizen to contribute to its vast, sprawling strength.
In ancient Rome, the life of a teenager unfolded slowly, shaped by rituals, expectations, and routines that seemed ordinary to the Romans themselves, yet now appear distant and strangely complex. As you rise before dawn, the city still lies half asleep beneath a cool gray sky, with faint smoke curling upward from scattered household hearths. Rome is never completely quiet. Even at this hour, footsteps echo on stone pavements, carts roll slowly, and distant voices murmur in alleyways. As a Roman teenager, you belong to a world where family duty, social rank, public life, and ancient traditions shadow every decision you make, determining not only your present, but also your future identity. You feel these expectations almost physically, as though they are woven into your tunic, your sandals, and even the air you breathe. Your day begins with the household gods. The small shrine in your domus, the Lararium, glows faintly with the remaining oil of last night's lamp. You stand before the painted images of the Lares and Penates, offering a small pinch of incense or a quiet prayer. This ritual, performed daily, is less about devotion and more about the continuity of tradition. You do it because your father did it, because his father did it, because every proper Roman does it. These small acts give structure to a world that values order above everything. Even as a teenager, you already sense that Rome survives not only through armies and senators, but through rituals repeated endlessly within households across the city. After completing the morning rites, you prepare for your day. If you are wealthy, a slave assists you, adjusting your tunic and fastening your belt. If you are poorer, you dress yourself quickly, washing your face with water drawn from a communal fountain. Wealth shapes the details of life, but not the rhythm. All Roman teenagers rise early, and all are expected to contribute to the household in some way. For rich boys, this means education, studying rhetoric, literature, mathematics, and Greek. For poorer boys, this means labor, helping in workshops, markets, or family businesses. For girls, life differs again: domestic training, weaving, managing household tasks, and preparing for an early marriage negotiated by the family. Whether rich or poor, boy or girl, teenager or adult, every Roman exists within a network of obligations. Stepping outside, you enter the streets of Rome. They are narrow, noisy, and alive with people. Vendors set up stands selling bread, olives, fruit, or simple meals. Artisans open their shops, carrying tools and materials. Slaves move quickly, performing errands for their masters. The city feels enormous and crowded, yet familiar. You know where to walk to avoid the worst smells, which alleys are safe, which shops treat customers fairly, and which fountains always offer cool water even in the heat. As a teenager, you're beginning to navigate Rome with more independence. You are no longer a child held by the hand, yet not fully an adult who can vote, marry freely, or hold property. If you're a teenage boy from a wealthy household, you walk with your tutor, the pedagogus, to your school or private lessons. His presence is both protective and restrictive. He carries your writing tablets, corrects your posture, and ensures your behavior remains proper. You resent him sometimes, but his role is essential. Romans believe that discipline shapes character, and character shapes destiny. Your education is meant to transform you into a citizen capable of speaking publicly, negotiating, and acting with authority. You memorize passages from Virgil and Homer, practice declamation, and study the laws and histories of Rome. Your teacher is strict. Lessons unfold slowly, with pauses for correction, repetition, and dictation. You practice writing with a stylus on wax tablets, rehearse speeches aloud, and learn to argue cases both real and imaginary. Sometimes the lessons feel endless, but you know they matter. In ancient Rome, mastering language and thought is a path to status. Senators, generals, and magistrates all rely on rhetoric. Although you're only a teenager, adults already expect you to prepare for your future public responsibilities. Meanwhile, if you were a teenage girl, your daily life is anchored within the household. You learn to spin wool, weave cloth, manage servants, and oversee food preparation. These skills are not merely chores, they symbolize the ideal Roman woman, diligent, modest, and capable of running a home. Mothers, aunts, or older women instruct you, demonstrating techniques passed down for generations. You might help prepare offerings for the household gods, assist with cooking, or accompany family members to markets. Though your world is smaller than that of boys, it is no less important. The stability of Roman families rests on the management of the household, and girls are trained for this responsibility from a young age. As the morning progresses, the city grows louder. Metal tools ring inside workshops, merchants shout prices, and animals move through the streets. Teenagers of lower classes work alongside adults, learning trades like carpentry, pottery, leatherworking, or metal forging. Some serve as apprentices, others as assistants in shops or taverns. Work is repetitive and requires patience. You sweep floors, fetch materials, shape clay, repair boots, or carry goods. Every task teaches you something: skills, discipline, and the value of labor. Social mobility exists in Rome, but it requires skill, luck, and connections. Even poor teenagers can dream of rising through craftsmanship or trade, though the path is long and uncertain. At midday, the heat intensifies. You and your companions rest briefly, perhaps eating bread, cheese, figs, or olives. Wealthier families enjoy fuller meals, sometimes including fish, vegetables, or imported delicacies. In every home, meals are communal, reinforcing the bonds of family and hierarchy. You sit lower than your elders, waiting for permission to speak or eat. Respect for authority is ingrained into childhood, and by your teenage years, it feels natural. After midday rest, the city resumes its pulse. For wealthy boys, lessons continue: philosophy, mathematics, or readings from historians. You learn not only facts, but values, the virtues of Rome, the greatness of ancestors, the importance of loyalty, courage, and restraint. Education shapes your sense of self. You imagine future roles: soldier, statesman, orator. You dream of achieving honor, earning a place in public life, and ensuring your name enters the family records. If you are not wealthy, your afternoon returns to labor. You carry deliveries, help your father in the workshop, or assist your mother at the market. You observe adults negotiating prices, arguing about debts, or discussing rumors about politics, festivals, or military campaigns. Even as a teenager, you absorb the atmosphere of Roman society. You learn when to speak, when to remain silent, and how to navigate social interactions. As evening approaches, Rome slowly softens. Shadows lengthen across buildings. People gather in taverns, fountains, or small public squares. Teenagers meet friends, exchanging jokes, stories, or small boasts about their day. In wealthier households, young people practice singing, play board games like Ludus Latrunculorum, or listen to elders recount family history. Girls help prepare the evening meal, discuss marriages, or care for younger siblings. Boys may join their fathers in discussing politics or news from the forum. Night descends, and oil lamps flicker in windows. Your family sits together for the main meal of the day, the cena. Conversation flows, carefully chosen topics, respectful tones, laughter in moderation. After eating, you return to the Lararium once more, offering thanks or quiet reflection. Ritual marks both the beginning and end of your day, tying you gently to the countless Romans who lived, prayed, worked, and hoped before you. Eventually, you lie down on your bed, whether in a crowded insula apartment or a spacious room in a villa. The noise of Rome continues faintly outside: distant footsteps, carts, dogs, laughter, and occasionally shouts. You close your eyes knowing that tomorrow will follow the same rhythm. As a teenager in ancient Rome, your life is not defined by rebellion or leisure like in modern times, but by gradual learning, steady responsibility, and constant preparation for adulthood. The world is slower, heavier, and rooted in tradition. Yet within it you discover your own identity as you move step by step toward the future that awaits you, one shaped not only by fate, but by the expectations, teachings, and duties that surround you each day. The life of a Roman teenager moved forward slowly, shaped by repetition, habit, and expectations that were established long before the teenager was born. Each morning began in almost the same way, with small variations caused by season, household status, and the position of the sun. But generally, the day opened with a quiet awareness of responsibilities that stretched from family obligations to community customs. Roman households centered around the domus or the insula, and teenagers living in these spaces woke to the sounds of ordinary Roman activities: the sweeping of the courtyard, the footsteps of slaves carrying water, the muted conversations of parents,
the distant rumble of carts on the stone pavement, the barking of street dogs, and the metal clang of shop shutters opening. A teenager in Rome rarely woke to silence. The city hummed with continuity, and life followed that rhythm. Education shaped the early hours of many teenagers, though the type and depth of that education depended heavily on the family's wealth. Some teenagers attended lessons with a grammaticus, studying literature, recitation, memorization, and the correct manner of speaking. They traced lines of poetry, repeated maxims from earlier authors, and learned to shape their words according to Roman ideals. At the same time, others worked alongside their parents or masters, learning trades: leatherworking, baking, metalwork, weaving, carpentry, or shopkeeping. In both cases, the learning process moved slowly and patiently. There were no rapid transformations, only daily repetition. Skills deepened by countless hours of practice rather than sudden insight. The teenager became familiar with the weight of tools, the smell of fresh-cut wood, the dust of grain, or the rigid posture required to recite text properly. Everything unfolded according to custom. Meals during the day were simple and never rushed. A teenager often ate bread dipped in oil, olives, figs, nuts, or porridge. Some households added cheese, fish, or leftover stew, but most mornings were plain. Eating in Rome rarely resembled feasts, except during festivals. Daily meals served to maintain energy rather than to create pleasure. Teenagers carried the tastes of these foods throughout their routines, and these familiar flavors formed part of the sensory landscape of their youth. Social expectations also shaped the teenager's identity. Young men grew up knowing that Rome valued discipline, modesty, and loyalty. Young women grew up knowing that Rome expected them to maintain household honor, show modesty, and learn domestic management. These expectations were so deeply woven into Roman culture that they did not need to be spoken aloud. The teenager absorbed them through observation, the way parents greeted guests, the way mothers supervised weaving, the way fathers managed business agreements, the way neighbors interacted, and the way elders carried themselves during public events. Over time, these patterns formed an invisible framework around the teenager's behavior. The streets of Rome offered constant movement. Teenagers walked through narrow alleys and wider roads, observing markets filled with vendors calling out their goods. The smell of fresh bread mixed with the scent of fish stalls and the heavy odor of tanneries. On certain corners, barbershops offered grooming and conversation. Teenagers often lingered outside these places, listening to discussions about politics, gladiator games, military campaigns, or local gossip. Rome's public spaces acted as classrooms, teaching teenagers about the world without formal instruction. Even when they were not permitted to participate in discussions, they listened, absorbing knowledge through exposure. Religious rituals repeatedly framed their days. Shrines appeared at street corners, in homes, and at public squares. Teenagers learned to offer small gestures of respect, placing a bit of bread, lighting a small flame, bowing their head toward a household lararium. Religion in Rome was not emotional or mystical in the modern sense. It was procedural, formal, and tied to tradition. Teenagers performed these acts because everyone else did, because it felt improper not to, and because the gods were woven into the stability of daily life. Festivals brought variety, but everyday rituals were quiet and ordinary. Physical labor formed part of many teenagers' routines, whether drawing water, carrying goods, sweeping floors, assisting in shops, or helping in workshops. Their bodies adapted gradually to the demands of Roman life. Strength grew slowly. Endurance developed through repeated tasks rather than formal exercise. Some teenagers trained for athletics, especially those connected to wealthier families, but even then, training was methodical, repetitive, and guided by tradition. Running, wrestling,
Discus throwing and other activities were practiced with little concern for entertainment and more for discipline. Friendships formed through proximity. Teenagers interacted with peers in workshops, schools, markets, and temples. Conversations tended to revolve around practical matters, family responsibilities, upcoming festivals, the price of goods, rumors of political changes, gladiator fights, or stories of distant lands brought by merchants. Friendships were steady rather than dramatic, shaped by daily encounters rather than emotional declarations. Loyalty developed through years of shared routines. A teenager might walk the same streets for 15 years with the same companions, building bonds that strengthened gradually. Family authority remained absolute. Teenagers consulted parents on decisions as simple as what clothing to wear or when to leave the house. The Roman father, the pater familias, held legal power over the entire household, and teenagers interacted with this figure with a mixture of respect, fear, and familiarity. Household roles were stable. Mothers instructing daughters in household management did so patiently but firmly. Fathers guiding sons in trade or public behavior emphasized responsibility and restraint. A teenager internalized these expectations slowly. Public bathing, a central part of Roman culture, offered a brief change in rhythm. Teenagers visited bathhouses with family or friends. They moved through warm rooms, hot rooms, and cold rooms, listening to the echoes of conversations bouncing off stone walls. The baths offered a social environment that blended cleanliness, relaxation, and community observation. Teenagers learned the unspoken rules of behavior, where to sit, how to greet others, when to remain quiet, and how to avoid conflicts. These spaces served as quiet schools for social awareness. Entertainment slowly filled their weeks. Theaters, chariot races, gladiator games, and festivals brought excitement, but even these events were experienced through the lens of Roman tradition. Teenagers learned to cheer for certain chariot factions, to recognize gladiators, and to follow stories portrayed in plays. These diversions punctuated their routines, but did not overshadow their responsibilities. Rome's entertainment culture shaped their imagination, but their personal lives remained disciplined. Marriage expectations grew more concrete as the teenager aged. For young women, marriage often arrived early. For young men, marriage followed social and economic readiness. Teenagers learned to accept these expectations as part of their destiny. Marriage was less about romance and more about alliances, family continuity, and social stability. The teenager prepared mentally for this transition, slowly absorbing the idea that their life served their family and community. Nighttime brought a gradual silence. Lamps flickered in homes, casting long shadows on walls. Teenagers completed final household tasks, listened to parents discussing the day, and prepared for rest. Without modern noise or artificial light, night descended with calmness. Streets quieted, except for occasional patrols or distant conversations. Teenagers fell asleep with a sense of continuity, knowing that the next day would resemble this one, slow, disciplined, shaped by tradition, and grounded in the rhythms of Roman life. Their world changed gradually, and they grew in it at the same pace. The teenager's identity in Rome emerged not through sudden transformation, but through daily repetition, small lessons, and the steady accumulation of experience. Each year added layers of understanding, responsibility, and social awareness. The city shaped them, their family shaped them, and the unchanging routines of Roman society formed the backdrop against which their youth unfolded. Life progressed slowly, steadily, and predictably, extending into adulthood with the same deliberate rhythm.
Life as a Roman teenager unfolded with a kind of steady, predictable rhythm that rarely surprised anyone. Each day began early, usually before sunrise, because the Roman world valued discipline, repetition and the quiet efficiency of routine. In most households, a teenager woke to the faint light slipping between shutters, the muted sounds of servants preparing food, or the street's slow stirring, vendors arranging their carts, shopkeepers opening their doors, and water carriers walking along with their heavy amphoras. The teenager's day started not with excitement, but with the ordinary expectation that today would resemble yesterday, and tomorrow just the same. The Roman teenager's first task was simply preparing for the day. A boy might put on a tunic secured with a belt, its fabric simple or fine, depending on his family's means. A girl might wrap herself in a stola or a plain tunic, sometimes covering her head with a palla before stepping outside. Clothing reflected identity and social position, and teenagers learned early that dress carried meaning, wealth, modesty, respectability, and proper citizenship. Everything served as quiet instruction. Breakfast was modest, bread dipped in wine, olives, or perhaps a bit of cheese. Romans did not treat breakfast as a large meal, and teenagers learned not to expect indulgence. A slow seriousness permeated mornings. Even the act of eating seemed a small lesson: restraint, structure, and discipline. The teenager then faced the obligations that defined their stage of life. For boys of citizen families, education was central. They walked through the city streets to the home of a teacher, the literator, carrying wax tablets, styluses, and scrolls. Lessons were repetitive: reading aloud, writing letters, memorizing lines, tracing shapes, copying phrases, and reciting rules of grammar. Day after day, teenagers grew accustomed to the slow building of skill through monotony. The teacher corrected mistakes with quiet firmness, occasionally striking a student's palm with a rod, a reminder that discipline shaped character. After the literator came the grammaticus for more advanced students. Grammar, poetry, and history filled the hours. The teenager learned to interpret the words of earlier poets, to analyze sentence structure, and to memorize passages. Roman education relied heavily on memory because memory proved loyalty to tradition. Teenagers spent long hours reading about past heroes, battles, and speeches, absorbing not just knowledge, but the Roman conviction that history repeated itself and that the best path forward lay in understanding the past. Girls received education at home, guided by mothers, nurses, or hired tutors. They learned household management, weaving, reading and writing if the family valued literacy. Their lessons were steady and practical. They prepared wool, organized storerooms, measured grain, supervised younger siblings, and learned the rhythms of domestic economy. Everything reinforced the idea that adulthood would require calm competence, patience, and careful oversight. For teenagers from poorer families, the day looked different. Instead of formal study, they apprenticed in workshops and shops. Boys learned trades: metalwork, carpentry, stone cutting, pottery, shoemaking, and masonry. Girls assisted in markets, cooked in taverns, washed clothes, or helped manage booths selling oil, bread, or vegetables. The hours were long, repetitive, and quiet. Work required endurance more than creativity. Teenagers learned skills by watching elders perform tasks repeatedly. Skills passed from hand to hand, eye to eye, without formal instruction. The slow, steady nature of labor shaped their character. Throughout these routines, teenagers absorbed societal expectations. Romans believed that young people must develop gravitas, a kind of seriousness. They learned not to speak loudly, not to interrupt elders, not to show excessive emotion, and not to draw attention to themselves. Humility and discipline formed the foundation of adulthood. Midday came with the heat of the sun. Teenagers rested briefly, eating a simple meal, often cold: bread, figs, cheese, leftover fish or vegetables. Some families served warm dishes at lunch, but most saved their main meal for the evening. After eating, teenagers either returned to their studies, resumed work, or took short walks with siblings. The hours between noon and late afternoon passed steadily. Recreation existed, but it too carried structure. Teenagers played games with dice, nuts, or small stones. Boys practiced wrestling, running, and throwing the javelin. Girls played with knucklebones, spinning tops, or small dolls carved from ivory or terracotta. Teenagers visited public fountains, chatted with neighbors, or watched street performers. Yet even these activities were quiet, simple, and repetitive, reflecting a world that valued moderation. As the teenager grew older, expectations expanded. Boys accompanied fathers to the forum, learning how markets, politics, and legal disputes unfolded. They observed merchants negotiating contracts, magistrates issuing rulings, and speakers delivering speeches. They watched the steady stream of people, senators in their togas with purple stripes, freedmen in modest dress, slaves carrying goods, and soldiers patrolling the area. The teenager learned how the machinery of the city functioned, slowly, steadily, and always according to established rules. Girls shadowed their mothers through household duties, overseeing kitchens, supervising servants, inspecting laundry, preparing lamps, arranging food, and ensuring the smooth operation of the home. Roman houses functioned like small businesses, and the teenager learned how to manage them with calm consistency. Social expectations grew too. Teenagers began attending family festivals, dinners, and religious ceremonies. They participated in rites dedicated to household gods, carrying offerings of grain, wine, or incense. They learned prayers and rituals, memorized proper gestures, and followed elders with precise imitation. Participation reinforced identity. They were part of a household, a lineage, and a city bound by tradition. As they entered later adolescence, questions of marriage and adulthood appeared. Boys approached the age when they would lay aside the bulla, the protective charm worn since childhood, and don the toga virilis, the garment of adult citizenship. The ceremony was quiet, but important. It marked the moment when a boy stepped into public responsibility. But it did not mean immediate freedom. Instead, it signaled new duties, work, military service, or apprenticeship. Girls faced the expectation of marriage. Families arranged matches based on status, alliances, and property. A teenage girl learned that marriage was not simply personal, but a social institution linking families. Engagement rituals were modest, often marked by the exchange of small gifts and agreements spoken before witnesses. Toward evening, teenagers returned home. The main meal, cena, was eaten slowly. Families reclined on couches in wealthier homes or sat at simple wooden tables in modest ones. Dishes came one after another: vegetables, bread, lentils, fish, or occasionally meat. Conversation unfolded gently. Parents asked children about lessons, work, or progress. Teenagers listened more than they spoke, learning through quiet observation. After dinner, lamps were lit. Soft light filled the house. Teenagers prepared for sleep, washing hands and face with small amounts of water, changing clothes and folding garments neatly. Some households read aloud from scrolls, stories, philosophy, or poetry. Others played gentle games or simply talked quietly. Night settled slowly. Streets dimmed, shops closed, and the city grew quiet. Teenagers lay on simple beds or straw mattresses, listening to distant sounds like a cart rattling over stones, a dog barking, a servant moving through corridors, or the wind passing across the roof tiles. Sleep came not through excitement, but through the steady exhaustion of a structured day. The teenager's life in Rome continued like this for years, measured, disciplined, slow, and predictable. Through these routines, a Roman teenager gradually transformed into an adult shaped by tradition, responsibility, and the quiet endurance of daily obligations. Nothing rushed, nothing changed quickly. Adulthood emerged from repetition, not revolution. When they finally reached maturity, they understood the Roman world intimately, its rhythms, expectations, duties, and silent rules. They carried forward the lessons learned through countless patient days, stepping into the vast machine of Roman society prepared not by sudden transformation, but by long, steady training. Religious observance was integral to daily life for Roman teenagers. They learned rituals, prayers, and traditions associated with family deities, household gods, and public ceremonies. Festivals offered a combination of religious participation and entertainment, teaching teenagers both spiritual and civic responsibilities. Religious knowledge was also practical, guiding behavior in ways thought to maintain family fortune and personal safety. Superstitions and rituals were closely intertwined, creating a continuous, sometimes monotonous rhythm of observation, repetition, and expectation. Teenagers also encountered the realities of social hierarchy and patronage. They were taught to respect authority, seek favor through appropriate behavior, and understand the obligations of citizenship, particularly for boys of freeborn status. Lessons about loyalty, duty, and honor were reinforced both at home and in public spaces. Mistakes or breaches of etiquette were met with correction, sometimes harshly, shaping behavior through repetition and careful observation. Romantic interest began to emerge during adolescence, though it was highly regulated by family oversight. Arranged engagements were common among the upper classes, and teenagers learned early the significance of family alliances. Courtship, when permitted, was guided by etiquette, with emphasis on reputation, modesty, and adherence to social norms. Love, desire, or curiosity existed, but were frequently subordinated to duty, family expectation, and public perception. Food and diet played a subtle but persistent role in teenage life. Meals were structured, often simple, and dictated by both availability and status. Bread, vegetables, legumes, and small portions of meat or fish formed the staples for most adolescents. Wealthier teens enjoyed more variety, including exotic imports or delicacies, but the rhythm of meals was constant: early breakfast, midday main meal, and a light evening snack. The preparation and consumption of food offered lessons in moderation, manners, and responsibility, reinforcing broader expectations of adulthood. Health and personal hygiene were limited, yet ingrained in practical routine. Teenagers learned to maintain clothing, keep hair tidy, and observe simple cleanliness practices. Full bathing remained rare for many, often reserved for special occasions or supervised by family. Medical knowledge was rudimentary, relying on diet, exercise, and herbal remedies. Teenagers were expected to follow advice and observe family and community practices to prevent illness. The slow rhythm of daily life, combined with structured learning, labor, socialization, and religious observance, created a world that felt both repetitive and instructive. Teenagers in Rome navigated a complex network of expectations, slowly acquiring the skills, knowledge, and habits necessary for adult life. Their days were long, repetitive, and disciplined, yet each small task, lesson, or ritual contributed to a broader understanding of their place in society. By the end of adolescence, a Roman teen had internalized much of the family, social, and cultural order. Knowledge, skill, and behavior had been cultivated through repetition, observation, and controlled experience. The life of a teenager in ancient Rome, though often tedious and heavily structured, provided a foundation for adulthood, ensuring continuity in family, civic, and religious life. As you moved deeper into young adulthood, Rome itself became less a place of wonder and more a place of responsibility. You learned to navigate markets, negotiate prices, pay taxes, and answer politely to magistrates. You became aware of the laws that governed the rhythm of daily life. You witnessed the harsh realities of the city, poverty and crowded insulae, disputes among neighbors, and the constant murmur of political tension. You saw triumphal parades celebrating military victories and funeral processions honoring Rome's fallen leaders. All of it shaped your understanding of the world you were joining. Evenings brought a quieter but equally important education. The household gathered around the dinner table. Conversations drifted from politics to philosophy to family affairs. You listened attentively, absorbing the unspoken rules of debate, when to speak, when to remain silent, and how to disagree respectfully. In Rome, silence was often as valued as speech. Wisdom lived in balance. Religious duties also expanded. You participated more fully in household rituals, lighting incense, offering prayers, and maintaining the family's connection with its guardian spirits, the Lares and Penaetae. For boys, public religious roles became attainable as they grew. For girls, the depth of household religion became their domain, and they carried this responsibility with quiet pride. Slowly, the identity of a Roman teenager dissolved into the identity of a Roman adult. You woke each day facing tasks that required judgment rather than instruction. You ate meals as a participant rather than an observer. You walked through Rome not as a child wandering through an overwhelming city, but as someone contributing to its constant motion. Yet despite all these changes, the essence of your life remained tied to the rhythms that had guided generations before you. The clatter of carts on stone streets at dawn, the hum of conversation in the forum, the chanting of priests during ceremonies, the soft flicker of oil lamps at night, the distant echo of soldiers training on the Campus Martius. The life of a Roman teenager did not end suddenly, but blended into a new existence, marked by duty, shaped by tradition, and strengthened by the slow accumulation of responsibility. And so you stepped forward, day after day, into the long unfolding path of Roman adulthood, not with the dramatic flair of legends, but with the quiet, steady certainty that Rome expected from every one of its children, whether they stood in the vast marble heart of the city or in the dusty outskirts where fields and roads met the horizon. For a Roman teenager, daily life was shaped by a combination of family, social status, education, and practical necessity. Boys and girls experienced different expectations, though both were bound by customs that emphasized discipline, obedience, and preparation for adult roles. Boys, particularly those from wealthy families, often began their mornings with lessons in reading, writing, and rhetoric. The ability to read and write in Latin, and sometimes Greek, was considered essential for future political, legal, or business careers. Lessons could be conducted at home by private tutors, often educated slaves or freedmen, who were trained in literature, grammar, and philosophy. These lessons were long, repetitive, and sometimes boring, involving the copying of texts, memorization of passages, and recitation of speeches. Girls, in contrast, focused more on domestic skills, though some received formal education depending on the family's wealth and values. They learned household management, spinning, weaving, and the preparation of meals. In wealthier homes, girls were also taught reading, writing, and basic arithmetic, often to maintain correspondence, manage household accounts, or supervise domestic staff. Social etiquette was emphasized for both sexes. Teenagers were expected to understand their family's position in society, to respect elders, and to behave with restraint and decorum in public. Beyond formal education, Roman teenagers engaged in labor appropriate to their family's social class. Boys from plebeian families might assist in trade, farming, or crafts, learning skills that would allow them to contribute to family income. Girls often helped with household chores, supervised younger siblings, and assisted servants. Wealthy teenagers observed and occasionally participated in business dealings, learning negotiation, debt management, and the importance of public reputation. Daily routines were long and structured, leaving little room for leisure for most adolescents. Physical activity formed another essential aspect of Roman teenage life. Boys were encouraged to exercise to develop strength, endurance, and coordination, often through running, wrestling, swimming, or practicing with wooden swords. Such activity was considered preparation for military service or public duties. Girls were less involved in formal exercise, but were encouraged to maintain health through walking, household activity, and supervised games. The concept of sport as leisure existed, but was limited, particularly for girls. Socialization and friendship were shaped by both family oversight and local customs. Teenagers formed bonds with peers through play, study, and communal gatherings. Wealthier youths sometimes attended public spectacles, such as theatrical performances, gladiatorial games, or religious festivals, often under the supervision of adults. These events provided opportunities to observe civic life, understand cultural norms, and learn the proper ways to respond in public settings. In commoners, socialization often occurred informally, through neighborhood interaction, shared labor, or communal festivals. Religious observance was integral to daily life for Roman teenagers. They learned rituals, prayers, and traditions associated with family deities, household gods, and public ceremonies. Festivals offered a combination of religious participation and entertainment, teaching teenagers both spiritual and civic responsibilities. Religious knowledge was also practical, guiding behavior in ways thought to maintain family fortune and personal safety. Superstition and ritual were closely intertwined, creating a continuous, sometimes monotonous rhythm of observation, repetition, and expectation. Teenagers also encountered the realities of social hierarchy and patronage. They were taught to respect authority, seek favor through appropriate behavior, and understand the obligations of citizenship, particularly for boys of freeborn status. Lessons about loyalty, duty, and honor were reinforced both at home and in public spaces. Mistakes or breaches of etiquette were met with correction, sometimes harshly, shaping behavior through repetition and careful observation. Romantic interest began to emerge during adolescence, though it was highly regulated by family oversight. Arranged engagements were common among the upper classes, and teenagers learned early the significance of family alliances. Courtship, when permitted, was guided by etiquette, with emphasis on reputation, modesty, and adherence to social norms. Love, desire, or curiosity existed, but were frequently subordinated to duty, family expectation, and public perception. Food and diet played a subtle but persistent role in teenage life. Meals were structured, often simple, and dictated by both availability and status. Bread, vegetables, legumes, and small portions of meat or fish formed the staples for most adolescents. Wealthier teens enjoyed more variety, including exotic imports or delicacies, but the rhythm of meals was constant: early breakfast, midday main meal, and a light evening snack. The preparation and consumption of food offered lessons in moderation, manners, and responsibility, reinforcing broader expectations of adulthood. Health and personal hygiene were limited, yet ingrained in practical routine. Teenagers learned to maintain clothing, keep hair tidy, and observe simple cleanliness practices. Full bathing remained rare for many, often reserved for special occasions or supervised by family. Medical knowledge was rudimentary, relying on diet, exercise, and herbal remedies. Teenagers were expected to follow advice and observe family and community practices to prevent illness. The slow rhythm of daily life, combined with structured learning, labor, socialization, and religious observance, created a world that felt both repetitive and instructive. teenagers in Rome navigated a complex network of expectations, slowly acquiring the skills, knowledge, and habits necessary for adult life. Their days were long, repetitive, and disciplined, yet each small task, lesson, or ritual contributed to a broader understanding of their place in society. By the end of adolescence, a Roman teen had internalized much of the family, social, and cultural order. Knowledge, skill, and behavior had been cultivated through repetition, observation, and controlled experience. The life of a teenager in ancient Rome, though often tedious and heavily structured, provided a foundation for adulthood, ensuring continuity in family, civic, and religious life.